The first thing you notice on night shift isn't the silence. It's the way the building breathes when it thinks no one is listening. Day shift has noise layered over everything. Voices, carts, phones, the constant low-grade urgency of people trying to stay ahead of something. At night, that noise drops away, and what's left feels organized. Not quiet, structured. Like the hospital has its own rhythm that doesn't need us. My name is Daniel Reeves. I was 31 when I took the job at St. Alderic Regional, just outside a town called Millhaven, Idaho. Population barely 4,000 if you counted the outskirts and the farms that stretched past the river. The hospital sat a mile off the highway, isolated enough that at night the only lights you could see were the ones we kept on. I didn't plan on staying long. Nobody does with jobs like this. Night custodial work is something you take when you need time to think or when you're trying not to. For me, it was both. Orientation was short, 40 minutes in a break room that smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant. A woman named Carol from HR went through the usual things: schedule, safety, where not to leave wet floors unattended. Then she handed me a stapled packet. "Just read the rules," she said. "Sign the last page." I flipped through it. Most of it was standard: waste disposal, biohazard handling, where to log supply shortages. Then halfway through, the formatting changed. No bullet points, no headers, just short, numbered lines. Do not enter the west stairwell between 12:10 a.m. and 12:22 a.m. If you hear a patient call light from an unoccupied room, do not respond. Avoid looking directly into any darkened room after midnight. Use reflections if necessary. If you are addressed by name by someone you cannot see, do not answer. The kind of thing board staff put together to mess with new hires. I looked up at Carol, waiting for her to smile. She didn't. "Sign the last page," she repeated. I signed it. My supervisor, Greg, met me outside the break room. Late 40s, tired posture, the kind of guy who had settled into routine so completely it had become a personality. "You read the packet?" he said as we walked. "Yeah," I said. "Is that—" "Don't worry about it," he cut in. "Just follow it." That was the end of the conversation. The first few nights were normal enough. Clean floors, empty trash, restock supplies. The ER had the only real activity, and even that slowed after 2 a.m. The rest of the building felt like a series of paused moments, rooms waiting to be used again, hallways holding on to the last footsteps that had passed through them. It was on my 5th night that I noticed the timing. There's a clock above the nurses' station in the East Wing. Old analog thing with a second hand that ticks just loud enough to be annoying if you focus on it. I had just finished mopping the corridor when I glanced up at it. 12:09 a.m. The second hand moved. 10, 11, 12. At exactly 12:10, the lights flickered. Not off, not even dim, just a brief hesitation, like the building had missed a beat. I looked down the hallway. Nothing changed. Same doors, same low hum of machines behind walls, same distant beeping from the ER. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, measured, coming from the west stairwell at the end of the hall. I hadn't been told anything about avoiding that area yet. Not directly. The rule was still just something I half remembered from a packet I hadn't taken seriously. The footsteps stopped. I stood there with the mop in my hands, listening. After a few seconds, they started again, but closer this time. That was the first moment something didn't fit. Not fear, not yet, just a kind of quiet misalignment, like a word spelled correctly, but still wrong somehow. I pushed the cart forward, telling myself it was probably a nurse, maybe someone using the stairs instead of the elevator. The footsteps reached the door at the end of the hall. Then they stopped. The door didn't open. I waited. Nothing. I walked the rest of the corridor slowly, the sound of the cartwheels louder than usual. When I got to the stairwell door, I paused. There's a small rectangular window set into it. Wired glass, the kind that distorts shapes just enough to make them unclear. The light inside the stairwell was off. I leaned slightly, trying to see down through the glass. Nothing, just darkness and the faint outline of steps. Then, very softly, from the other side of the door, Daniel. My name, clear, close, not muffled, not echoed, like whoever said it was standing right up against the door. I didn't answer, mostly because I wasn't sure my voice would come out right if I tried, but also because something in my head clicked into place. One of those rules, half remembered, suddenly relevant. If you are addressed by name by someone you cannot see, do not answer. I stepped back from the door. The handle didn't move. The door didn't open. After a few seconds, I turned and walked back down the hallway, slower than usual, keeping my pace even. The cartwheels squeaked in a steady rhythm. Behind me, the stairwell stayed silent. I didn't report it. Not that night, not the next one either. Because nothing else happened. No voices, no footsteps, no flickering lights. Just routine. And routine has a way of smoothing over things that don't make sense, filing them down until they almost feel like they belong. It wasn't until the 7th night that I realized the rules weren't there to scare you. They were there to keep something from noticing that you'd already made a mistake. By the 7th night, the building had settled into something predictable again, or at least predictable enough that I could pretend the first incident had been a misunderstanding. That's how it works in places like this. Not denial exactly, just a quiet agreement between you and your own thoughts to stop pulling at threads that don't lead anywhere useful. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6:30 a.m., same as always. I clocked in, signed the log, checked the supply closet, mop heads, gloves, disinfectant, everything in place. Greg gave me a short nod from the end of the hall and said, "East Wing first tonight." No explanation. There never was one. The East Wing was quieter than the rest of the hospital. Fewer patient rooms, more administrative offices, a physical therapy space that sat empty overnight. The kind of area that felt temporary, even when it wasn't. I started with the usual routine: trash, surfaces, floors. The motions were automatic by now, the kind that let your mind drift without losing track of what your hands were doing. For the first couple of hours, nothing felt off. At 11:48 p.m., I passed room E214. The door was closed. That mattered because I'd cleaned that room not 20 minutes earlier, and it had been open then. Empty, lights off, bed made. I stopped the cart and looked at the handle. No sound from inside. I told myself it was a nurse. Someone checking inventory, maybe. Or a patient reassigned late. Still, I stepped closer. There was a narrow glass panel set into the door. Not clear, more like frosted, enough to see shapes, not details. The room beyond looked dark. No silhouettes, no motion. I stood there longer than I needed to. Then I remembered another line from the packet. If you hear a patient call light from an unoccupied room, do not respond. I hadn't heard a call light, not yet, but the phrasing stuck with me for a different reason. Unoccupied. I had been in that room. I knew it was empty. I backed away from the door, just a step, and waited. Nothing happened. After a few seconds, I shook my head, pushed the cart forward, and kept working. At 12:06 a.m., I was back near the nurse's station. Diane was on shift that night, early 50s, efficient, the kind of person who spoke in complete sentences even when she didn't need to. "You're on East?" she asked without looking up from her screen. "Yeah," I said. She nodded once. "You'll want to be clear of the hallway in a few minutes." There was no emphasis in her voice, no explanation, just information. "Why?" I asked. She paused, just briefly, like she was deciding how much to say. "Because it's easier if you're not there," she said. That was it. I checked the clock. 12:08 a.m. The second hand ticked forward. About the voice. About the rules I hadn't taken seriously. At 12:09, I moved the cart into a side alcove near the supply closet. Not out of fear exactly, more like compliance. Like following a procedure you don't fully understand, but assume exists for a reason. The hallway stretched out in front of me, empty. 12:10. The lights flickered again. This time, I was watching for it. The flicker lasted maybe half a second. Long enough to notice, too short to mean anything on its own. Then the sound started. Not footsteps, something softer, like fabric brushing against a surface. Slow, continuous, moving along the length of the corridor. I leaned slightly, just enough to see past the edge of the alcove. The hallway looked normal, but the sound was there, moving steadily from one end to the other. I tracked it by ear, left to right, room by room, pausing briefly at each door. I felt a pressure build in my chest, not sharp, not painful, just awareness. The kind you get when something is happening that you don't have a category for yet. The sound reached E214, the door I'd seen closed earlier. It stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Then, a soft click. The door opened. Not all the way, just a few inches. Enough for the darkness inside to feel present. I couldn't see anything move, no figure. Just that slight gap and the absence behind it. I realized I was holding my breath. The sound didn't continue. It didn't move on to the next room. It stayed there, at E214. I glanced back at the clock over the nurse's station. 12:14. 4 minutes had passed. It felt longer. The hallway remained unchanged, light steady, no alarms, no voices. Just that open door. At 12:17, the door closed, slowly, quietly, until it clicked back into place. The sound in the hallway resumed, same soft dragging movement, continuing down the corridor. I didn't follow it. I didn't move at all until it faded completely, swallowed by distance or walls or something I couldn't track anymore. At 12:22, the lights flickered again, then everything went back to normal. Diane stood up from the nurse's station and stretched like nothing had happened. "You're good," she said. That was her way of telling me it was over. I stepped back into the hallway. The air felt the same, maybe a little cooler. I walked to E214. The door was closed. I hesitated, then reached for the handle. For a second I thought about the rule. Avoid looking directly into any darkened room after midnight. I didn't open the door. Instead, I leaned slightly and used the glass panel. The angle gave me a partial view. The room was still empty, bed made, equipment in place, nothing out of order. Except, on the floor, near the foot of the bed, there was a faint mark. Not exactly. More like a line where something had passed. Subtle. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. I stepped back. Behind me, Diane said, "You don't need to check those rooms again tonight." I turned. She was watching me now. Not concerned, not curious, just making sure. I nodded. Okay. She went back to her station. I stood there for another second, then turned away from the door. Back to the cart. Back to the routine. But something had shifted. Not the building, not the rules, just my place in it. Because now, I wasn't following them out of habit or instruction. I was following them because I had started to understand what happened when you didn't. After that night, the rules stopped feeling like suggestions and started behaving more like boundaries. Not the kind you test, the kind you recognize after you've already come too close to crossing one. I didn't ask Diane about what I'd heard. I didn't ask Greg either. There was a pattern in the way people worked here. Information wasn't shared, it was accumulated. Slowly, individually. You learned what you needed by staying long enough to notice what didn't get talked about. On my ninth shift, Greg handed me a new assignment. Basement tonight, he said, like it didn't matter. I hadn't been down there yet. Anything I should know? I asked. He shook his head once. Just follow the rules. That answer again. Same tone, same finality. The basement access was through a service hallway near the loading dock. Heavy door, keypad entry. The kind of place that felt separate from the rest of the hospital, even before you stepped inside. I punched in the code Greg had given me. The lock clicked. The door opened inward. The air down there was different. Cooler, but not in a controlled way. The temperature felt uneven, like it changed depending on where you stood. The lighting was harsher too. Fluorescent strips spaced farther apart, leaving stretches of dimness between them. Not darkness, just enough shadow to break continuity. The layout was simple. Long central corridor. Storage rooms on either side. Laundry at the far end. Boiler room off to the left. I pushed the cart forward, the wheels echoing slightly louder than they did upstairs. At first, everything was normal. Dust, mostly. Some supply overflow. A few empty carts parked along the walls. Nothing that stood out. I started with the storage rooms, working methodically. Door, light, clean, move on. By 11:55 p.m., I was halfway down the corridor. That's when I noticed the door at the end, marked B17. It was open, not unusual on its own, but I had a checklist, and B17 wasn't on it. I stopped the cart and looked at the clipboard. B12 through B16, then laundry. No B17. I looked back at the door, still open, just a few inches. No light inside. I told myself it was nothing, just a room not in use, left open by mistake. Still, I didn't move right away. There was a feeling, familiar now. That same quiet misalignment, like the space wasn't behaving incorrectly, just differently than expected. I walked closer. Each step echoed slightly off the concrete floor. When I reached the door, I didn't touch it. I leaned, just enough to see the edge of the room. Dark. No visible contents. No shelving. No equipment. Just empty space. Which didn't make sense. Every room down here had a purpose. Storage, maintenance, utilities. There were no empty rooms. I checked the number again. B17. I looked back at the clipboard. Nothing. Behind me, the corridor stretched out, silent. I remembered another line from the packet. If you encounter a space that does not appear on your assigned map, do not enter. I stepped back. That was enough. Whatever B17 was or wasn't, it wasn't part of my shift. I turned the cart around and moved on. At 12:07 a.m., I was in the laundry room. I hadn't realized the time until the machine stopped. All of them. At once. The hum cut out clean. No wind down. No delay. Just silence. I looked up. The lights didn't flicker this time. They held steady. But the silence felt heavier down here than it had upstairs. More contained. Like it had weight. Then I heard something from the corridor. A door. Not slamming. Closing. Slowly. I stepped out of the laundry room. The central corridor was empty, but the sound continued. Another door, then another, one by one, each closing in sequence, moving closer. I felt my grip tighten on the cart handle. There were a lot of doors down here, too many for coincidence. The sound reached the midpoint of the corridor, paused, then continued. I turned slightly, tracking it. B14 closed. B15 closed. B16. The door shut with a soft click. Silence. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, a different sound. From the far end, near B17. A shift, like something adjusting its weight. I didn't look directly. Not fully, just enough to register that the door was no longer open. It was wider now, not fully, but more than before, and the darkness inside it felt deeper, not visually, spatially, like it extended farther than the room should allow. I took a step back, then another. The cartwheels squeaked, loud in the quiet. From inside B-17, something moved. Not forward, not outward, just present. A change in the shape of the darkness. I felt that same pressure in my chest again, stronger this time. Not pain, recognition, like my body understood something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. Then from inside the room, Daniel. Same voice, same distance, close, too close for the space between us. I didn't answer. I didn't move forward. I followed the rule, but something else happened. The silence after the voice didn't stay empty. It held, like it was waiting, not for a response, for something else. I realized then that the rules weren't just about what you did. They were about what you gave attention to. I broke eye contact first, turned my head slightly, focused on the floor, on the cart, on anything that wasn't that doorway. The pressure eased, just a little. From the corner of my vision, I saw the door shift, slowly, closing, not fully, just enough to reduce the opening back to what it had been when I first saw it. A few inches. The corridor remained still. At 12:19 a.m., the machines in the laundry room started up again, one by one. Normal sequence, normal sound, like nothing had happened. I stood there for a few seconds longer, then turned and walked back toward the stairs. I didn't finish the basement that night. When I got upstairs, Greg was waiting near the supply closet. "You're early," he said. "Yeah." He looked at me for a moment. Not surprised, not concerned, just assessing. "B-17 was open," I said. He nodded once. "Yeah. That room's not on the map." "No." I waited for more. There wasn't any. "Should it be?" I asked. He shook his head. "No. That was the end of it." I went back to work, finished the east wing, avoided the west stairwell, did everything the way I was supposed to. But something had changed again, because now I knew the rules weren't just about avoiding things that shouldn't happen. They were about avoiding things that had already found a way to happen anyway. And the difference between those two wasn't as big as I wanted it to be. I stopped thinking of the hospital as a single building. It was easier to function that way. Instead of one place with consistent rules, it became a collection of overlapping areas, each with its own behavior, its own boundaries, its own version of what normal meant. The east wing had patterns. The basement had gaps. The stairwells, at least one of them, had something else entirely. What tied them together wasn't layout. It was timing. Everything that mattered happened between 12:10 and 12:22. 12 minutes. Not exact in the way a clock is exact, but consistent enough that you could feel it approaching before it started, like pressure changing before a storm. On my 12th shift, I decided to test something. Not a rule. I wasn't that far gone. Just a detail. Something small enough that if I was wrong, it wouldn't matter. I wanted to know if the timing was the same everywhere. Greg assigned me a split route that night. Start in the east wing, rotate through ER, finish with a supply run near the west stairwell. It wasn't unusual, but it meant I'd be moving when 12:10 hit. At 12:08, I was halfway between ER and the central corridor. At 12:09, I slowed my pace, not stopping, just enough to notice. The lights flickered right on time, same as before. But the sound didn't come immediately. There was a delay. 2 seconds, maybe 3. Then, a call light. Repetitive. Coming from a room on my left. I checked the number as I passed. ER03. I had cleaned that room less than an hour earlier. Empty. Bed stripped. Monitor off. No patient assigned. The call light continued. I stopped. This was different. Up until now, everything I'd experienced had followed the rules closely enough to make sense of them. This didn't. I stood there, listening. The light above the door flashed in sync with the sound. On, off, on, off. Steady. Waiting. I remembered the line. If you hear a patient call light from an unoccupied room, do not respond. I had followed that rule before by default. This time, I was choosing it. I stepped back from the door. The call light didn't change, didn't stop, didn't escalate, just continued. I moved away. 10 steps down the hall, 15. The sound faded slightly with distance, but didn't disappear. At the corner, I stopped and looked back. The light was still flashing, same rhythm, no variation, like it would keep going whether I listened or not. I turned the corner. The sound cut off instantly. Not faded, not reduced, gone. That was new. I stood there for a second, processing it. Then I checked the clock on the wall, near the nurse's station. 12:12. 2 minutes in. I kept moving. The central corridor was empty. No footsteps, no fabric sound, just the low hum of systems that hadn't shut off this time. I passed the west stairwell. The door was closed. No sound from the other side. I didn't slow down, didn't look at the window, just kept walking. At 12:14, I reached the supply room, near the administrative offices. Inside, everything was normal. Inventory logs. I stepped in, set the cart aside, and started checking stock. It felt almost routine again, until I noticed the mirror. It was mounted on the inside of the door. I hadn't paid attention to it before, didn't need to, but now I caught movement in it, behind me. Subtle. Not enough to define, just a shift in the reflection that didn't match anything I was doing. I froze. Slowly, I looked at the mirror. My reflection stood where it should. Same posture, same position. But the space behind me, it wasn't empty. There was a distortion. Not a figure, not exactly. More like the outline of something that wasn't aligning with the room. Tall, narrow, offset slightly, like it didn't fully occupy the same space. I didn't turn around. Another rule. Avoid looking directly into any darkened room after midnight. This wasn't a room, but the principle felt the same. Use reflections if necessary. So I watched the mirror. The distortion didn't move closer, didn't shift position. It just remained, present, like it had always been there, and I had only just noticed. I focused on my breathing, kept it steady, even. The pressure in my chest started again, stronger than before. Not painful, but insistent, like something was sinking to it. I adjusted my breath slightly, changed the rhythm. The distortion flickered, not visually, conceptually, like it had to recalibrate. That was enough. I stepped sideways, still facing the mirror, still not turning around. The distortion didn't follow. It stayed fixed in the same relative position, anchored. I reached for the door handle behind me, opened it, stepped out into the corridor, then let the door swing shut. The mirror, and whatever was in it, disappeared from view. The pressure eased immediately. I checked the clock. 12:17. 5 minutes left. The hallway was empty again. Too empty, even for this place. I moved toward the east wing, faster now. Not running, but not slow either. At 12:19, the lights flickered once more. The hum returned to full. Everything reset. I stopped walking, listened. Nothing. No call lights, no footsteps, no movement. Just the hospital. Normal. I went back to ER03. The door was open. The room was empty. No light flashing, no sound, no indication anything had happened. I stood there for a moment, then stepped inside, checked the panel. No active calls logged. No errors. Nothing. When I came back out, Diane was at the station. "You hear it?" she asked. "Yeah." She nodded. "Don't answer those." I didn't. "Good." She went back to her screen. Conversation over. I stood there a second longer. Then, I asked, "Does it always stop when you walk away?" She paused. Looked at me. "Not always," she said. That was the first answer I'd gotten that made things worse. Because it meant there were versions of this I hadn't seen yet. And the rules weren't guarantees. They were just the best outcomes anyone had managed so far. After that, I started paying attention to what didn't reset. Up until then, I'd been thinking of the 12 minutes as a contained event. Something that started, happened, and then ended cleanly at 12:22. Like a system cycle. Predictable. Bounded. It wasn't. Some things stopped. Some things stayed quiet. But a few things carried over. You only noticed them if you were looking for continuity instead of events. On my 14th night, I came in early. Not scheduled, just early. I told Greg I wanted to reorganize the supply closet. He didn't question it, just handed me the keys and said, "Stay out of the way." The hospital at 9:30 p.m. felt different than at 10. Less settled, like it hadn't fully decided what it was going to be yet. I used that time to check something I hadn't before. The logs. Not the cleaning logs, those were routine. I mean the maintenance logs. Incident reports. Internal notes. Anything that wasn't meant for someone like me, but wasn't locked down tightly enough to prevent access. There was a terminal in the back office off the east wing. Old system. Slow interface. No real security beyond a staff login. I had Diane's password. She typed it in front of me enough times that memorizing it hadn't been difficult. I sat down, logged in, started searching. Keywords first. Call light malfunction. Dozens of entries. Most of them normal. Wiring issues, panel faults, replacements scheduled. But scattered through them were notes that didn't fit. No source identified. Signal logged without activation. Room verified unoccupied. Dates going back years. Consistent. I searched stairwell. Fewer results, most routine, but one entry caught my attention. West stairwell. Access restricted 010 to 022 per standing protocol. No explanation, no origin, just standing protocol. I searched B17. Nothing. Not even a placeholder. Like the room didn't exist in the system at all. That matched the map, but it didn't match reality. I leaned back in the chair, thinking. There was one more thing I hadn't checked. Names. I pulled up staffing records, filtered by long-term employees. Greg was there. Diane. Carol. A few others. Then I searched something I wasn't sure I wanted to confirm. Former staff. Terminated. Missing. The system took longer to load. When it did, the list wasn't long. 7 names, over 12 years. That alone wasn't unusual. Turnover happens. But the notes attached to them, that was different. Failed to adhere to protocol. Unverified absence following shift. Record incomplete. Dates clustered, not random. Spread out, but always within the same 2-week window each year. October. I checked the current date. October 17. I stared at the screen for a few seconds longer, then logged out. The room felt smaller than it had before. Not physically, just in the way information changes space. I went back to work. Same routine, same motions. But now there was context. Not complete, not even close, but enough to change how I interpreted things. At 12:05, I positioned myself near the east wing again. Not hiding, not testing, just observing. At 12:10, the lights flickered. Right on time. No delay this time. The sound started immediately. But it wasn't the fabric movement. It wasn't footsteps. It was something else. A voice. Not clear. Not formed into words. Just sound shaped like speech. Coming from multiple directions. Hallway. Rooms. Behind walls. Layered. Overlapping. Like conversations happening just out of reach. I stayed still. Listened. Didn't try to understand. Because it didn't feel like language. It felt like structure. The pattern of communication without content. At 12:12, one of the voices separated. Not louder, just closer near my right side. I didn't turn, didn't look. I focused on the floor, on the edge of the cart, on anything stable. The voice shifted, aligned. Then, Daniel Reeves. Full name, clear, correct. That was new. Up until now, it had only used my first name. This was different, more precise. I felt the pressure again. Immediate, stronger than any previous night, like something had locked onto a clearer signal. I didn't respond, didn't move. The voice didn't repeat, but it didn't leave either. It stayed, waiting. I changed my breathing. Deliberately uneven. Short inhale. Long exhale. Pause. Then reverse. The pressure stuttered. Just slightly, but enough. The voice lost clarity. Not gone, just less defined. Like interference. At 12:15, the overlapping sounds started to thin out, one by one, until only that one remained. Then it faded too. Not abruptly, gradually, like distance increasing. At 12:19, the lights flickered. Everything stopped. Clean. Immediate. I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding tension in my chest. That was when I noticed something on the floor, near my feet. A mark. Faint. Like the one in E214, but clearer. A line. Curved slightly, as if something had moved around me. Not toward, not away. Around. I looked down the hallway. Nothing. Same as always. I crouched slightly, examined the mark. It wasn't residue. It wasn't damage. It was absence. Like the surface had been altered at a level just below visibility. I straightened up. Behind me, Diane said, "You heard that one, didn't you?" I didn't turn. "Yeah." She walked up beside me, looked at the mark, then at me. "That means you're in rotation now," she said. "Rotation for what?" She didn't answer immediately. Just watched the hallway. Then she said, "It doesn't pick everyone." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting tonight." She turned and walked back to the station. I stayed where I was, looking at the mark, then at the clock. 12:23. 1 minute passed. Everything looked normal, but it wasn't. Because now there was a pattern I couldn't ignore. The rules weren't random. The events weren't isolated. And whatever this was, it wasn't just happening in the building. It was narrowing, focusing, and I had just been moved closer to the center of it. I didn't go home after that shift. I sat in my car in the far end of the parking lot, engine off, watching the hospital through the windshield, like distance might change what it was. The building looked the same as it always did. Flat exterior, dim perimeter lights. Nothing in its shape or structure that suggested anything beyond what it claimed to be. That was the problem. Everything that mattered about it wasn't visible from the outside. At 7:12 a.m., Diane walked out the main entrance. She didn't look around, didn't hesitate, just crossed the lot, got into her car, and left. Like none of it followed her. I waited another 10 minutes, then went back inside. Day shift had already taken over. Different energy, brighter, louder. The building felt diluted. Whatever pressed in during the night had receded, leaving behind something easier to stand in. Greg was in the supply room. "You forget something?" he asked. "I need to ask you something." He kept organizing shelves. "Make it quick." "What is rotation?" His hands stopped moving. Just for a second. Then he set the box down. "That's not something you ask about during the day," he said. "I'm asking now." He looked at me, really looked this time, measuring, deciding. Then he sighed. "Rotation means it's noticed you consistently," he said. "Not just once, not random contact. Repeated alignment." "Alignment with what?" He ignored that. "You start getting more direct interactions, more precise ones." It used my full name. I figured. "That's bad?" He gave a short, humorless nod. "It means it's refining." I felt that word sit wrong. Refining what? You. Silence stretched between us. "That doesn't make sense." "It doesn't have to," he said. "You just have to work around it." "How?" "Same way as before. Follow the rules." "That's not enough anymore." "No," he said. "It isn't." That was the first honest thing he'd said. "So what happens when it's not enough?" Greg picked the box back up. "People leave," he said. "Or?" He didn't answer. I already knew why. Because I'd seen the list. 7 names. October. Incomplete records. "I'm not staying for that," I said. Greg nodded. "Then don't." It was that simple to him. Not because it was easy. Because he'd already made his choice a long time ago. "When?" I asked. He looked at the clock on the wall. 8:03 a.m. "Before it learns you outside this place," he said. That landed harder than anything else. "Can it do that?" He met my eyes. "It already started." I thought about the mirror, the breathing, the way it adjusted. That wasn't location-based. That was something else. I left the hospital at 8:20, drove straight home, packed a bag, not everything, just enough. Clothes, documents, essentials. I didn't overthink it, because staying meant giving it more time, and time, I was starting to understand, was the one thing it used better than anything else. By noon, I was on the highway, heading west. No plan, just distance. The first few hours felt normal. Too normal. Like I was overreacting. Like I'd taken a set of strange but contained experiences and turned them into something bigger than they were. That thought lasted until 12:06 a.m. I was in a motel outside Boise by then. Cheap place, single floor, door facing the parking lot. I woke up without knowing why. Checked my phone. 12:06. The room was dark. Quiet. Then, a sound from the bathroom vent. Soft, irregular, not mechanical. I didn't move, didn't sit up, just listened. The pattern was familiar. Not identical to anything I'd heard before, but close enough. Searching, adjusting. Then, Daniel Reeves, full name, same clarity, same proximity, inside the room. I closed my eyes, not out of fear, out of recognition. Greg had been right. It had already started. The rules weren't tied to the hospital. The hospital just made them easier to follow. Here, there was no structure, no schedule, no shared awareness. Just me and it. The pressure built in my chest, faster than before. Like it didn't need time to sink anymore. Like it already had what it needed. I forced my breathing out of rhythm. Sharp inhale, hold, long exhale, break the pattern. The sound in the vent stuttered, adjusted, followed. I sat up, swung my legs off the bed, didn't look at the bathroom, didn't give it a direct angle. I needed noise, not rhythmic, unstructured. I grabbed my bag, the metal hanger from the closet, bent it, dragged it hard across the metal edge of the desk. A sharp, broken screech. No pattern, no consistency. Again and again. The sound filled the room, jagged, unstable. The pressure hit a peak, then slipped. Just slightly. Enough. The voice didn't repeat. The vent went quiet. Not empty, but disengaged. I kept going another 10 seconds, then stopped. Silence. Heavy, but mine. I checked the time. 12:11. Still 8 minutes left. I didn't stay. I grabbed my bag, opened the door, walked out into the cold air of the parking lot, left the room behind. At 12:19, the lights in the motel didn't flicker. Nothing reset, because nothing here was containing it. I stood there under a buzzing street lamp and understood something I hadn't let myself fully accept before. This wasn't about surviving the 12 minutes. That was just training, a controlled environment, a place to learn the rules. Out here, there was no end time, no reset, no shared system keeping it in place. Just distance, movement, interruption. I got back in my car, didn't go back inside, didn't check out, just drove. Because the only thing Greg had said that actually mattered was the part he didn't explain. Before it learns you outside this place, it already had. The rules were different. Don't stay still too long. Don't let it find your rhythm. Don't give it clean patterns to follow. And most importantly, don't assume distance means safety. Because whatever noticed me in that hospital wasn't in the building. It was just waiting for me to step out of it.